The man bleeding on Naomi's exam table had just offered to buy her a country. "Anyone you want," Baek Tae-yang slurred, grinning up at her while she dug a bullet out of his shoulder at 2 a.m. "Small one. Portugal. You look like a woman who'd enjoy Portugal." "Stop talking or I'll sew your mouth shut next." He laughed, actually laughed, with 9 millimeters of metal barely out of his body, and Naomi Reyes decided she hated him. Her little clinic sat on the wrong side of the river, the kind of place where people paid in cash and never gave real names. But in a year of quiet practice, she'd never had a patient arrive in a convoy, kick open her door, and announce that he'd heard she had gentle hands. "You're 21, he said, watching her work with fever-bright eyes. "I asked around while my men carried me in. Youngest doctor in the district. Top of your class. Beautiful. Why are you hiding in a gutter clinic, Naomi Reyes? Why are you leaking on my floor, Baek Tae-yang?" She'd recognized him the moment his men dragged him in. Everyone on this side of the river knew that name. Self-made, unpredictable. The boss other bosses crossed the street to avoid. "Fate," he said solemnly. "A bullet," she corrected. "Same thing, tonight." She dropped the slug into a metal dish and reached for the suture kit. And that was when his hand came up, quick for a man half-conscious, and caught her wrist. Not hard. Careful, like she was the injured one. His thumb pressed lightly against her pulse. "It's fast," he murmured, something shifting in his expression, the humor draining out and leaving behind a focus that made the small room feel smaller. "Your heart." "That's adrenaline. Let go." "No, I don't think I will." He said it the way other men said good morning. "I think I'm going to keep you." "I'm not a stray cat." "You're right." His grin returned, crooked and certain. "Cats are easier." She stitched him in silence after that, aware of him watching her the entire time. Not the wound, her. Her hands, her mouth when she bit her lip in concentration. When she finished, he sat up against medical advice, shrugged his ruined shirt over the bandage, and pulled a black card from his jacket. He set it on her tray like a chess piece. "For the mess." "I don't want your money." "I know." He stood, steadier than he had any right to be, and leaned in close enough that she caught cedar smoke and something sweet underneath, like burnt sugar. "That's the problem, doctor. Now I have to figure out what you do want." He left her standing in the wreckage of her night. Across the city, in a quiet office above a quieter bank, a man named So Min-jun was about to learn exactly whose clinic Baek Tae-yang had bled in, and lose his composure for the first time in years. So Min-jun had loved Naomi Reyes for 1 year, 2 months, and 11 days, and she had no idea he existed. He preferred it that way. Love, in his experience, was a liability you managed like any other. Quietly, at a distance, through intermediaries. So when her clinic's rent mysteriously never increased, when her supplier bills kept arriving prepaid, when the district's collectors somehow never knocked on her door, Naomi chalked it up to luck. Min-jun signed the papers himself, every month, and asked for nothing. Then, Baek Tae-yang bled in her clinic, and by sunrise the whole river district was whispering that the mad dog of the south side had found himself a doctor. Min-jun's driver had never seen him leave the office mid-morning before. Naomi was restocking gauze when the bell above her door chimed, and the temperature of the room seemed to change. The man who entered wore grey, like other men wore armour. Tall, composed, not a thread out of place. And he looked at her with an expression she couldn't name. Relief, almost. Like someone checking that a priceless thing hadn't been broken. Dr. Reyes? Her name in his mouth sounded practiced, worn smooth from use. You had a patient last night. I have a lot of patients. Who's asking? Saw Min June. Her hands stilled on the shelf. That name didn't get whispered like Taeyang's. It got avoided entirely, the way people avoid saying anything about the ocean while standing in it. The other side of the river belonged to him, and, she realized with a cold drop of understanding, so did this side of her street. Her building. Her landlord's landlord. You, she said slowly, are my luck. Something flickered across his calm. You knew. I suspected someone. Nobody's rent stays flat for a year. She crossed her arms, chin rising. Why? He could have lied. He had a dozen prepared answers. Investment, charity, strategy. Instead, he looked at her. This small, fierce woman in scrubs who'd stitched his enemy back to life, and told the truth for the first time in years. 14 months ago you treated one of my men, a boy, 17. Everyone else refused because of who he worked for. You didn't ask. You held his hand until he stopped shaking. He paused. I came to thank you. I saw you asleep at your desk instead, and I decided you should never have to worry about anything again. It was supposed to be simple. And now? Now Baek Taeyang knows you exist. His voice stayed level, but his eyes didn't. So nothing is simple anymore. The door chimed again. Taeyang stood in the frame, holding an armful of ridiculous red roses, his grin sharpening into delight when he saw who was there. Min June, you absolute snake. He laughed, thoroughly pleased. A whole year of hiding her, and I found her in one night. 2 kings in a room the size of a heartbeat, and both of them looking at her. Naomi's clinic had never been so crowded, so clean, or so completely out of her control. It started the morning after the 2 men collided in her doorway. Taeyang's people arrived first, repainting her walls, installing equipment she couldn't pronounce, stocking her shelves with supplies worth more than the building. By noon, Min June's response stood outside. A full-time driver, because the district isn't safe, parked behind the security detail Taeyang had already assigned for the same reason. I don't need 2 armies, she snapped at both of them that evening, because of course they'd both come in person, arriving within 4 minutes of each other like it was choreographed. Agreed, said Taeyang. Send his home. Naomi. Min June ignored him entirely, and something about the way he said her first name, quiet, deliberate, like he'd been rationing it, made her breath catch. Tell me what you actually want, not what he has decided for you. What I want is 1 night without either of you in my clinic. She got neither. What she got instead was weeks of it. Taeyang appearing at closing time with food from restaurants that didn't do takeout, sprawling in her waiting room chairs like an oversized cat, telling her outrageous stories until she laughed despite herself. Min June came differently. Early mornings, quiet hours, fixing things without being asked. She'd find him reading in the corner while she worked, and the silence between them felt less like emptiness and more like a held breath. The night it broke, it was raining, and Taeyang had just left. She laughed too hard at something he said, and Min-jun had watched it happen from the doorway, with an expression that cracked his calm straight down the middle. "You're jealous," she said when they were alone. It came out softer than she intended. "I've been patient for a year." He crossed the room slowly, giving her every chance to step back. She didn't. "I told myself watching you be safe was enough. Watching you be happy was enough." He stopped close, rein still on his shoulders, and lifted his hand to her jaw like she was made of something breakable. "Then I watched him make you laugh, and I understood that I am not a patient man. I was just a coward with good manners." "Min-jun." "Tell me to leave." She didn't. She curled her fingers into his coat and pulled, and he kissed her like a man finally spending something he'd saved for years. Slow, thorough, one hand sliding into her hair while the rain hammered the windows. She was breathless when they broke apart, her heart slamming, his forehead resting against hers. The clinic bell chimed. Tae-young stood in the doorway, holding the umbrella he'd come back for. For the first time since she'd met him, he wasn't smiling. He looked at Naomi's flushed face, at Min-jun's hand still tangled in her hair, and set the umbrella down gently. "Well," he said quietly, "now it's a real war." Tae-young didn't rage. That was the first thing that frightened her. The man who bought buildings on impulse and laughed with bullets in him simply picked his umbrella back up, wished her good night in a voice she didn't recognize, and walked into the rain. Min-jun watched him go with something almost like regret, and that was the second thing, because when had these men started mattering enough to hurt? Naomi didn't sleep. She sat on her clinic floor at 3 a.m, surrounded by equipment she hadn't bought, protected by guards she hadn't hired, kissed breathless by a man she hadn't chosen, not really, not out loud, and realized her entire life had been rearranged around her without a single decision passing through her own hands. So she made one. "Both of you, out," she said it the next evening, to both of them, standing between them in the middle of her renovated waiting room. "The guards, the drivers, the flowers, the visits, all of it stops. I was a person before either of you found me, and I've disappeared into being a prize. I won't be one. I need you both gone until I can hear myself think." Tae-young recovered first, the grin sliding back into place like armor. "You don't mean me, though. He kissed you. I'm the wronged party here. I mean both of you." And there it was, the difference, laid bare in a single moment. Tae-young argued. He negotiated, charmed, promised to be quieter, smaller, better, his voice climbing with something close to panic, because Baek Tae-young had never once in his life let go of a thing he wanted. He fought for her the only way he knew how, by refusing to hear her. Min-jun said, "All right." 2 words. He pulled out his phone, and by the time he reached the door, her security detail was dissolving into the night, the driver pulling away, a year of invisible scaffolding coming down because she'd asked once. He paused in the doorway, and only the white of his knuckles on the frame betrayed what it cost him. "The rent stays flat," he said quietly. "That was never about you owing me anything. Everything else? You'll never see it again, unless you ask." He looked at her the way he had that first morning, like checking a precious thing for cracks. "I waited a year without you knowing, Naomi. I can wait now that you do. Take whatever time you need." Then he was gone, and Tae-young was still standing there, roses wilting in his fist, finally understanding he'd lost something in this room, and not yet understanding what. "He'll use this," he warned. The noble exit. It's a move, Naomi. Men like us don't have anything else. Maybe. She held the door open, gently. But he heard me, and you're still standing here. For once in his loud, unstoppable life, Baek Tae-young had no answer at all. 3 weeks of silence taught Naomi Reyes that quiet could be a kind of voice. Min-jun kept his word so completely it ached. No visits, no gifts, no shadow of him anywhere. Just the flat rent and the memory of one rain-soaked kiss she kept turning over like a stone in her pocket. Tae-young lasted 4 days before the gifts resumed. Then apologies for the gifts. Then gifts apologizing for the apologies. Every delivery told her he still hadn't understood a word she'd said. She was closing the clinic when she heard them. 2 voices in the alley behind her building, low and tense. She should have locked the door. Instead, she stood in the dark storeroom and listened through the cracked window to the sound of 2 kings dividing a kingdom. "You're really doing it," Tae-young was saying. Standing down. The great So Min-jun folding. "I'm respecting what she asked for. You should try it." "I can't." And there, Tae-young's voice dropped into something raw, something she'd never heard from him. "You don't get it. Things I want, I take, and it works. It has always worked. It's the only thing I know how to do, and the first time it matters, it's the exact wrong thing." A bitter laugh. "You loved her for a year in silence. I can't survive a month." "Then you don't love her," Min-jun said, not unkindly. "You love how she makes you feel. It's not the same." The silence that followed went on so long Naomi's chest hurt. "No," Tae-young finally said, quieter than she'd ever heard him. "Maybe it isn't." She stepped out the back door before she could stop herself. Both men turned, and she watched Tae-young read her face. Really read it, maybe for the first time, and watched the last of his hope leave him gently, like a tide going out. "You heard all that." He rubbed a hand over his jaw, then laughed, small and real. "Of course you did. Fate, remember?" "Tae-young." "Don't." He crossed to her, and for once there was nothing theatrical in it. He took her hand, pressed it once between both of his, and let it go. "You laughed at my jokes when you hated me. Best month of my life." He glanced at Min-jun. "Take care of her, or I'll buy Portugal and make you both live there." Then he walked out of the alley and out of the fight, spine straight, and she understood it was the bravest thing she'd ever seen him do. Min-jun didn't move. Rainlight from the street caught his face, and all his composure was gone. Nothing left but a man who had waited a year, then 3 more weeks, and would keep waiting until she said otherwise. "You never asked me to choose," she said. "You were never mine to demand." Naomi crossed the alley and took his face in both hands. "Ask me now." "Stay," he breathed. She kissed him. Her choice, her decision, wholly hers. And he made a sound like a man coming home. The first thing So Min-jun did, as a man in love, was learn to make terrible coffee. Naomi teased him about it for months. That a man who ran half a city couldn't operate a kettle without supervision. But he kept showing up at the clinic before dawn anyway, sleeves rolled, presenting each cup like a treaty. He was there when she opened. He was there when she closed. Not guards, not drivers, not money moving invisibly through her life. Just him, learning her the honest way, hour by hour, "You could send someone to do this," she said one morning, watching him restock gauze with the focus of a surgeon. "I sent people for a year." He caught her hand and pressed his mouth to the inside of her wrist, right over her pulse, and smiled at what he found there. "Look how much time I wasted." Loving him turned out to be quiet the way he was quiet. Not empty, but full. He kissed her like punctuation, soft against her temple while she wrote charts, slow and deep in the storeroom until she forgot what she'd come in for. Unhurried on her couch at midnight, with her fingers in his hair, and the whole city forgetting to need either of them. A year of restraint had made him devastatingly thorough. He never once made her feel won. He made her feel found. Taeyong kept his word, in his way. He didn't buy Portugal. He bought the building across the street, opened an absurdly expensive dessert cafe he visited twice a year, and sent them a wedding gift 18 months later. A single red rose with a card that read, "I saw her first. Be happy anyway." He came to the wedding, charmed every guest, cried once behind a pillar when he thought no one saw, and left early with a florist who found him hilarious. The last Naomi heard, he'd proposed to her on a second date and been told to slow down, which, his men reported, only made him worse. The wedding itself was small. No convoys, no black cards, no kingdoms on display. A garden, a handful of people who mattered, and Minjun's hands shaking as he lifted her veil. This man who had never trembled at anything. 1 year, 2 months, 11 days, he said as his vow, voice low and sure. "That's how long I loved you before you knew my name. I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt it again." She kissed him before the officiant gave permission, to laughter and applause, and felt him smile against her mouth. They kept the clinic. The rent stayed flat forever, a private joke between them. Some evenings, closing up, she'd catch him watching her from the doorway the way he had that first morning, like checking a precious thing. Except now he crossed the room, pulled her into him, and held on. Nothing hidden, nothing waiting, nothing left unsaid. Just the quiet one, and the woman who chose him.